Limitations on God. Do you find yourself limiting God? Quite often we see people saying, God can't do this, God can't do that. The only thing my Bible says is God can't lie. And I do know that God does some extraordinary things, but I think today we have a lot of problems in this world, and we don't see, some people don't see a lot of miracles. They don't see a lot of things like that because we put limitations on God. Matter of fact, there was a pastor who wrote a book. I won't say what his name is, but in his book, he put on here, God does not give us additional books of the Bible. Okay. He doesn't speak to us audibly. So how does he know? How can you say, God, you can't speak to people audibly? God, you can't do this. You can't do that. Who is anyone that God has created telling God what he can and cannot do? Well, I personally have had a time in my life where everything was crumbling and I was reaching out to God like normal. I was driving to church. I crossed a bridge. And when I was driving across that bridge, a voice came out of the sky, an audible voice like my radio. And it said, pray for my people. Pray for my people. And tears started coming down my face. And the first thing that came to me was that verse that says, my sheep know my voice. I knew it was God. I knew God had spoken to me, and it was audibly. And as far as I know and remember, that's one of the only times he's ever spoken to me audibly. I'd have to go back and read all my notes and all my books because I've kept notes all these years. But usually it's a voice in my head, usually it's a dream, usually or a vision, which I haven't had very many visions, but I've had some. Um, but we can't tell God what to do. Who are we to think that we have a right to say God can and cannot do? He cannot speak to us any way he wants to. If you're putting a limitation on God today, you might be seeing a limited movement of God in your life. Matter of fact, if you really want to read, and I advise everybody to read at least a certain amount, and of course, the Bible, read the Bible. Everybody knows that. But what my point is here is there's some very good examples of people who trusted God and did not put limits on God. And one of the books is called God's Generals. Hopefully you can see it, God's Generals. Um, there's a lot of great examples in here of things that these people were a part of, that God used them to do. If you think that God has stopped talking to people today, you think that after the disciples everything stopped. You got some rethinking to do. God can do anything today that he did yesterday. Doesn't the Bible say God was the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow? Are we talking about the same God of the Bible in the Old Testament, the New Testament? Are we talking about the same things? Elijah with fire coming down from heaven, with a chariot of fire coming down, picking up Elijah and taking him to heaven? Are we saying that God can't visit with you? That God can't take you up to heaven and talk to you? What what are people putting limitations on? Now, sure, there's some people with some extraordinary stories, but let me just tell you what to do. Just like with everybody on the internet that calls himself a prophet, right? Prophetess, prophet, and you see it, they're self-proclaiming the name. When you see that, put it on a shelf. Well, and first of all, if they tell you something that's totally crazy and you know, oh no, there's 20 scriptures that say not to do this, then you know they're not what they say they are. However, just put it on a shelf. Put that thought on a shelf and see if it comes true. But again, always remember, psychics tell the truth half the time. That's why it's called deceit. They don't mean to. They think they're right. They think they're doing the right thing, but they're not. We know that. But don't put a limitation on God. Start limiting God, you start moving, or you start limiting how he can move in your life. Open up the possibility that God is listening and that God can do all things in any matter. And if God wants to speak to you, if he wants to have angels talk to you, if he wants to do anything, he can do anything he wants to do. I find it amusing that people will say, God will not speak to you audibly. I'm thinking, who are you? You God's lawyer? Are you giving God rules and you're his boss? Anyway, don't limit God. Have a great day.